The Inhumans episode 4, Make Way for Medusa. Now this episode I would say was okay, nothing super spectacular. I think they did a good job showing literally everyone in this episode actually did have something to do. I felt like in other episodes it was like, here basically the characters that are on Earth, and then here's Maximus doing his thing, and then here's Orin, and she's just kind of in a room, and she's just there, and she's trying to get to Lockjaw. And in this episode, still very minimal, but I felt it was better just because she was, no longer just trapped in a room, and it was kind of just, it was really a waiting game, because we knew she was going to escape at some point, so it was kind of just a waiting game for her to finally get to Hawaii. And in this episode she does, although ultimately it was really the most insignificant story out of everything that happened. It was like, okay, well, she escaped with Lockjaw. The last episode ends with this guy on his ATV. He hits Lockjaw. She's mad. He's like, hey, I'll help, call somebody to fix Lockjaw up, and that's pretty much all there was to it. Meets this guy's ex-girlfriend. She was a vet, or a doctor. I would assume it was actually a vet. And that was pretty much it. She helped Lockjaw. Orin didn't really understand everything that worked. It was like she just assumed Lockjaw was instantly going to be healed because she didn't know that stuff, which I thought was weird because some stuff they know and some stuff they don't, and I thought it was weird that she wouldn't know that things aren't instantaneous on Earth. So that kind of surprised me. I was like, of all the things that they would or would not know, I would think the healing properties of mankind would be like on the forefront of what they know and don't know about the technology of mankind. So that just kind of surprised me because I was like, I feel like they would know that, because I just thought that just made sense. Like, that's one of the most important things to know, even if they never do plan on going to Earth. They have those people watching the weird TV thing just like 24/7, so you'd think they know that. But the girl leaves and the dude gives her like the high five, and she's like, humans never touched me before. And then they have like this weird little moment where it's like clearly they're doing like a relationship thing that's not so subtle, also just as uninteresting. So I don't really care about it, but we'll see where that goes. We'll see what happens with that. I don't know if it'll last. I don't know what the plan is for the show as far as them staying in Hawaii and that being like the main focus, or at least main location of the series. But it does have me curious how that's going to ultimately play out with this character. They did bring in technically 2 new human characters. We had the introduction, of course, of the scientist in the last episode, and then we have Luis, who's helping Medusa in this one, and of course she was in the very first episode. So they're adding in more human characters, and I don't know exactly how relevant these 2 characters are going to be, this guy and his ex-girlfriend who helped Lockjaw out. But I thought that was interesting. And then the stuff with Karnak, where the other human characters are coming in, I always assumed that they were going to be temporary, so it didn't really it never really factored in. But then in this episode, it was like, maybe some of these characters aren't temporary. One of which definitely is, because he gets killed off by his friend, who is absolutely insane. I can't remember their names. I think Red is the crazy guy. And I was like, I just don't understand this dude. It was entertaining just because of how illogical it really was. Like, he was just crazy. And also, it was just crazy. Karnak's just getting laid. Like, this woman just kind of fell for this random dude. And they go to the beach, and he steps in the water. They make it where it's like he stepped in water for the first time ever, but he literally does that in the first episode. He's felt water on his feet. I guess not the rushing waves, but it was like he stepped in water before. I know he's done that because he did that during that fight scene. He was in boots, so I don't know. But, they go out to the water and everything, and then she kisses him, and they make out and stuff. And then they go back to her tent, and they do it and all that. And we find out that Red, he lied about his buddy. He was like, oh, he went to town and we ran out of beer. And we see him at the end of the episode, and he's digging this giant grave for all 3 of their bodies, and he already killed his friend. And I'm like, this makes no sense. Like, how crazy is this guy to, think that... I'm sure there would be something. I mean, clearly, he's insane, because he already had 2 people that he trusted, and I guess there was that reference, because the guy was like, you didn't trust us in the beginning either, and I thought that was going to be his way of rationalizing the fact that he can trust Karnak, where it's like, you're right, and then, now we have this thing, and, we're good. He helped them. He talks about how on Adelan they didn't have a lot of space, and he, upped production by, 40-something% and reduced actual human labor by 53%, or maybe that was, vice versa. And I was like, he's doing all this great stuff, and it was so weird, because I'm like, I can't tell if this dude doesn't trust Karnak, or if he's actually jealous of Karnak being with the woman, and I was just like, I don't really understand. He killed his buddy, but they do reference the fact that, and I wish I remember her name, but I can't remember. All I remember is, the evil dude out of, the 3 characters that are in there. But when they go swimming, Karnak asks her, was like, do the other guys go swimming? And she mentions the guy who got killed, and he's like, Red, not so much. And I was like, okay, so maybe that's a part of it. Maybe he's just always been jealous of that fact, and he saw that she had interest in Karnak, and it was like, oh, well, she's interested in him, and now she's interested in this brand new guy who like just randomly popped up, and then he got like super jealous, and it, I don't know, made him go even crazier. I don't know, something crazy. Like, he's just insane. He's absolutely insane. So that's going to be a big part of next week's episode, and they show the part where Karnak is trying to like focus on where the bullet is and like know where it's going to come from and what he can do. Basically, like slice. I mean, he doesn't have super strength, so even if he has like the measurements, there's no measurements to counter the force of a bullet. So I don't know. I don't know how that's supposed to actually play out, but we'll see what happens there. I think in the promo they show that the woman does end up getting shot. It looked like she was holding her stomach because she was shot, but there are also explosions, so she could have just been leaning down and happened to be holding her hand that way. But that's not how you run. You like run with your hands like kind of wild because you're freaking out. So I assume that in that situation, ultimately she gets shot. Something happens with the guy. I don't know if that was actually at the camp where those bombs went off, because that seemed, totally random. Like there would be mines or bombs set up in, a weed field. So I think that could have been in a different location, but either way, some crazy stuff is going to end up happening with them. Gargan in this episode, he's talking with the guys that helped him out in the fight in the last episode, and basically, the guy who was hit and fell out of the tree, he ultimately ended up dying, lucky. And so Gargan feels crappy about that, and it's like, all right, I need to find my family, but I kind of have to do it on my own. I have to retrace my own steps, and ultimately I need to do that because now you guys, having defended me as human beings, you feel like family, and I think it's more of the warrior thing. I kind of wish they had that line in there, because he just was like, you feel like family, and I understood why, but I was like, it would have been cool if he actually, for some reason to me, I was like, I feel like they should have had him just say, you feel like family because of how devoted you are to this cause that you were never really a part of. And I was like, man, I just feel like it would have been even cooler if he just fully explained it. I don't know why. That was just one of those rare moments where I was like, I think more would have actually been, more obvious dialogue actually would have been cooler in that situation. Just because, well, especially we don't know how long these characters are going to be in there either. And once again, I just assumed that all those guys were temporary. I didn't think they would die, but I also didn't think they would, be in the fight to begin with. So hard to tell when some characters are staying in and when they're going to be gone really soon. But it was cool. I was like, he trusted them, and they helped defend him, and he felt like he actually lost a friend, even though he like just met these people, because they were cool with him and they helped him fight in a fight that they didn't need to be involved in any way, shape, or form against superhumans. So I just thought that was interesting, and it made sense to me. It was like, you guys feel like family, and I have to protect my family, so I have to go do this on my own, and that's just the way it has to be. I'm sure that's not how it's going to ultimately play out, but that's what he decides, by this episode. But excuse me, I thought that was cool. His was fairly small. It was a lot like Oren's. It was just like, all right, not much really happened. They talked, and then we find out officially, Lucky died, and that was really it. So ultimately, his story was fairly small as well. And then of course we have the big story with Medusa and Blackbolt. And Blackbolt and his buddy from the prison are basically being held captive, but they don't actually know it until, towards the end of the episode. And they're being held captive by the scientist, who we find out super early on is actually working with Maximus. And I was like, oh, well, that's pretty nuts. I was not expecting that to happen at all. But turns out he's working with Maximus, and the plan is to kind of test the DNA and figure out how to basically utilize that on humans and give humans superpowers. It's almost like the Inhuman version of the super soldier serum. So I was like, alright, well, that's fairly interesting. Maximus plans on using that on himself in order to officially become an Inhuman. He's like, well, since I'm human, if I am able to find this, random little cure and implant this little bit of DNA into myself, I can go through Terrigenesis again, and then I'll actually be allowed to have a power, because it'll basically be like I'm doing it for the first time, because I'm just completely human now. So I thought that was an interesting concept. Of course, the genetic council is like, this is really dangerous, and we don't think you should do that. And then there's Maximus's buddy, who he's super pissed with, because, he's pissed with everybody, because they just have a crazy caste, racial, it was not racial, but caste, I guess it's racial, I don't know, it sort of is, I don't even know what to call it, power racist, I don't know. But he talks to his friend, he chokes him for a quick second, and is like, hey, you betrayed me when we were, when we were kids, that hurt. I we were still good friends though, so I kind of don't want to kill you, but I will kill everybody else. And I was trying to figure out for the longest time, because every time I saw his buddy, I was like, where do I know this guy from? And it finally clicked in this episode that he was from Westworld, which is like the other huge HBO show. So I was like, oh, well, that's why I recognize that guy. But ultimately, Maximus ends up killing off more people, kills off the genetic council, has his friend, and the whole plan is to wait for this scientist to get the DNA, I guess teleport it? I guess that was the plan. I didn't think of that until like just now. Like, I guess his plan is to just, he assumes that they're going to be able to kill off Blackbolt and stuff like that. Because he even tells him, he's like, you don't need him alive to, get his DNA. It's like, I do actually, because it changes so much. And it's just like every time he has that moment to kill his brother off, it's just like, actually, we can't do that. Or, it's Blackbolt, so he's insanely effing powerful. So, things ultimately don't really work out in Maximus's favor, as a whole at least. He killed off the council, but that's like the small stuff. And the bigger stuff is what ultimately failed, which was having Blackbolt, getting his DNA, and figuring out those issues. And it all comes down, to the end of the episode where Blackbolt and his friend are about to escape, and they get confronted by the group that's out there. I still don't remember the main woman's name. I starting to remember other people's names. I still forgot hers. But I still remember Mortis because they say his name a million times because everybody's scared of him. So, they have this confrontation, and as he's about to take his mask off, Blackbolt, he actually utilizes that super strength, which they officially show that he has, because I mentioned before, I was like, it seems like he does, but I can't really freaking tell because it's like enhanced strength more than super strength, really, because he should be able to just like knock people left and right if he wants to, but it's more like enhanced strength. It's a lot like Captain America, where it's stronger, but it's not super strength. It's not like, Hulk strength or anything like that. But he utilizes his strength. He takes the pipe off the gas tank, which apparently didn't mean anything, even though ultimately it came down to Luis driving the car and Medusa, opening the door to hit Mortis, and that's how the mask came off. That was still the plan. It was like, okay, blow him up, like kill us all, I guess was her plan. I guess because she can heal and she didn't really give enough. But I was like, what's the goal here? Like, because he was going to take it off, and I guess that was maybe a secondary bluff, because the bluff in general was to take him out, because even Blackbolt was like, I don't know if I can survive this, even with, my super strength and stuff like that. So I was like, I thought that was a cool little moment, because he was worried about it, and he had to come up with a secondary plan to kind of halt that situation. And like I said, she was just like, okay, sure. Like, we even see it in the promo, she does not die from this. Like, she wakes up with burns, but I guess, even without doing the actual healing herself, it's always like she passed out. She never officially dies. So I was like, I guess that's why she was going to do it. But fortunately, Medusa and Luis come in, and that comes after their long journey where, they share some emotional stuff with each other, which was very interesting in the way they did it, because they go through this crazy journey. It starts off with Medusa holding her hostage and forcing her to drive. They flee from the cops. They go to like the random little spot to eat, and then Medusa takes off, and Luis has to steal a car. And that's where they get to the part where Luis reveals what was in like the little rocket ship, and it's her father's ashes. And so they go through this moment of, one person trying to be like her father, the other person trying to be the opposite of both her parents. And I thought that was interesting. But the way they did it was so unemotional because of Medusa that it was actually kind of funny, because it's supposed to be like this emotional moment, and in most things it's like, that's tragic and I can identify with you and stuff like that. And in this case, Luis is telling this emotional story about her father and how he always wanted to go to the moon, and when they got to this point and they didn't know who they were going to pick, they chose pilots over scientists, and he was right on the cusp of that ultimate dream that he never achieved. And she tells this whole story, which is actually, admittedly fairly emotional, from the story that she told and how she followed in those footsteps. And Medusa was just like, literally, like, because I had the subtitles on, it was just like, huh. And she moved right past, and I was like, that makes it hilarious, because we still get that emotional moment, but they just crush it because Medusa's just like, I don't really care. I'll just want my husband. F you. You're still just like, ultimately, they kind of work things out, but it was like, you're just a human helping me out. Satellites. Find my husband, I don't care about your dad or anything. And she tells her the story about her parents, and we don't get too much out of that. We get like 2 little flashbacks that kind of didn't need to be there, if I'm being totally honest. I felt like the flashbacks, as short as they were, I felt like they didn't add anything. It was like the little moment with Medusa and her sister right after their parents were banished. And I was like, okay, for the that first moment, I was like, okay, that's kind of cool, because that's what I assumed was going to be like the introduction to these flashbacks for the episode, and there were only 2. And the second one, it kind of reiterated what we already knew. It was like, okay, well, they were traitors. We got that from, like, I think that was in the first episode. They referenced that, and it didn't, go beyond what I thought. Outside of, it was like, yeah, they tried to set a revolt, and that was really it. And it was like, okay, well, how did this change the landscape of Adelan? How many people were really involved? Did they just, was it just them that got killed because no one else wanted to admit that they were a part of it, and they couldn't prove it, so they couldn't banish anyone else? It was just like, yeah, they were traitors. They tried to start a revolt. And it was like, well, we knew they were traitors. We just didn't know exactly why. So it added like the tiniest little bit, and then that was it. And then they run off, and then it cuts back to Medusa and Luis talking. I was like, that was kind of a pointless flashback. Like, they could have just had Medusa say that as a part of her story, and it would have been the same. It just, it wouldn't have been as long because they cut to a flashback that was longer than Medusa just saying that. But ultimately, I was like, that didn't need to be there. And like I said, the first one I thought was an introduction, but it wasn't really. I thought it was like that was going to be sort of the theme for the episode, was her flashbacks of when she first had to kind of take over, as the parent for her younger sister. And that wasn't the case. It was just like the first one, and I thought it was going to focus more on her sister, but it was meant to be for both of them. And it was like, it's okay. And even that was super duper short, which is why I thought it was like an introduction to like the first of at least 3, flashbacks, like the rule of threes. Like the first of at least 3 flashbacks within this episode, kind of adding to this story of how they had to struggle when they were younger. And it really didn't show anything. It was literally like both flashbacks they easily could have been one after the other, because it was just like people were looking at them because their parents were traitors, and then they ran away from the king and queen because their parents had like just been banished for being traitors, and then they run off, and that's into the flashback. And I was like, both those things did exactly the same thing. At least in my eyes they did. I felt like there was nothing added, especially to the second one. I thought the first one was actually good because at least it showed them kind of being looked on as the children of traitors, and then they're also children left alone without parents. So it's like they're cast off from their parents because they were, considered traitors and banished. And then they're cast off from everyone else, even though they weren't banished. Everyone looks at them really funny because their parents, were traitors. And it was like, that was all we needed, really. If it was just going to be the one, that would have been fine. It still wouldn't have added too much, but it would have been a simple little thing. Like, okay, that's just a small moment, and we'll see more of that later. And I'm sure we will. But they made it seem like it was going to matter so much more. And it was like, that second flashback did nothing. Like, her story, I felt, did more than the actual flashback did. Like I said, it's literally one extra line. She could have said why her parents died for foolish ideals. And that was it. And I was like, that flashback did not add anything else. Like, it didn't add any extra emotion, to me at least. But that's just my opinion. I was like, I just felt like the flashbacks had really no value. Well, specifically the second one. Like I said, the first one, even outside of me assuming that was going to be like the first of a couple, I still thought it was definitely better than the second one, which added like one extra thing, which was they did a revolt, and that's why they were banished. I was like, okay, that's it. And then they run off in like pseudo slow motion, and then it cuts right back to them talking. And I was like, oh, all right, that was the flashback, and that was it. Not much of a transition between that flashback either. I was like, it was an odd, transition. They did do like a cool camera trick to pan back. It was just like transition, fade, and that was it. I was like, that just felt quick. It was weird. I don't know. But yeah, ultimately they go through their journey together as, just people together, and then ultimately actual allies, and then they end up saving Blackbolt at the end, and everything is kind of okay. Everybody's still pretty much split up, but we have our king and queen officially together, and Luis, I'm sure, is going to be, helping them out. Maybe she'll have a bit of information on the scientists, and, we'll get some extra stuff out of that. And it seems like the characters are really going to start getting closer together in this next episode. So I'm looking forward to that. I want to see them officially just get together, and then, we see what they end up doing next and how all that plays out. But we'd love to know what you guys thought about this episode, so please comment below. Let me know your favorite parts about it, your least favorite parts about it. And I definitely want to know where you guys think things are headed for the characters and the way things are in like the immediate future. Like in the next episode, I want to know what you guys have theories on as far as how things are going to end up playing out, and just what you guys want to see, because I think this is starting to build up towards that big reunion. And I feel like once we get there, that's going to be a big point for this season, when the characters are officially together, even without, Oren and Lockjaw. And I hope I'm saying their name right. I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce it. I was probably totally wrong this whole time. But even without the two of them, the other characters getting together, I think, is going to be a big point for the season. And then what that leads to as far as them possibly going back to Adelan and actually attacking Maximus, or him doing the Terrigenesis thing, if they're able to, the scientist is able to figure that stuff out before the family's able to, go back to the moon. maybe he will get those powers, because I heard he does actually have powers in the comics, or he gets powers at least. So I don't know. We'll see what happens, but I'd love to know your theories for how things are going to play out in this next episode and how you want them to play out in the immediate future, even if it's not just the next episode, but next couple. What you guys want to see for sure, and of course, what you guys thought about this episode in general. So please comment below, let me know, and thanks for watching.